everybody. It's great to welcome all of you to this session on Caribbean Hymnody, Voicing God's Twang. We're really excited to welcome the Reverend Dr. Mikie Roberts and a panel of experts in this field. I can't wait to hear everything we're going to experience in the next 2 hours. And by the way, if you haven't yet looked at our conference materials for the summer, this would be a good opportunity, not now, but later on, to check out online on our website, www.hymnsociety.org, plans for this upcoming summer's conference, and registration is open too, so check it out. Well, I want to introduce Mikie Roberts. The Reverend Dr. Mikie Roberts is an ordained Moravian pastor who's currently serving as Program Executive of Spiritual Life and Faith and Order at the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland. Right there in Geneva right now, it's about 9 o'clock at night. So we're grateful that you stayed up for us today. He's been serving in that position since February 2019. And prior to his appointment at the World Council, for the past 25 years, he has served in several capacities throughout the Moravian Church across the Eastern Caribbean. These include Provincial Director of Music, Minister of Music, Pastor, and Associate Pastor. So he's well-grounded in experience, and also he was the General Editor of the first Caribbean Moravian hymnal and liturgy book. So he has a lot of experience to share with us, and a lot of wonderful connections to share with us today as well. So welcome, Mikie, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mike, and good day, because it's night for me, but it's morning or afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're at. I hope I got the lighting right, and unfortunately the sun has long since set, so it is certainly a joy to be sharing with you. This evening, I have brought along with me some of my Caribbean music colleagues, and with me this evening are Joanne Richards, Philip Ford, Alston Smith, Roger Gittins, and we are awaiting, and hopefully he'll be here very soon, George Mulrain. I would have prepared their bios and sent that to you, Brian, and I'm sure it would have been passed on to you. So I don't want to spend too much time in terms of the introduction. Joanne is coming to us from Jamaica, Philip is in Barbados, Roger is in Barbados, and Alston is in Trinidad, and George is in Jamaica. So we are spread all over the Caribbean today, sharing with you. So our topic for today is voicing God's twang, the maturation of Caribbean hymnody. And this evening, I'm going to do a short sort of 10-minute or so introduction. And then from there, we will move, hopefully if George gets here by then, into George's session. And then afterwards, Philip, and then I will come back to speak about the Moravian hymnal, and then we will go into 3 other presentations that will be done first by Roger, then by Joanne, and finally by Alston. But to get things rolling, we are going to sing, and I've asked Brian for us to sing one of the better known Caribbean hymns that have sort of made its way in terms of internationally, The Right Hand of God. And we're not going to sing all of it, of course, in the interest of time, but I just want us to sing the first verse. As I said to the others, my neighbors may disturb me, so I'm just going to play the first note and we'll sing along. The right hand of God is writing in our land, writing with power and with love. Our conflicts and our fears, our triumph and our tears are destroyed by, are recorded by the right hand of God. Welcome to singing via Zoom. You have to make sure the things are scrolled down. Now, this hymn is well known, I'm sure, to all of us. And Brian, you can remove the screen. And I just wanted to use that as a segue into our discussion this afternoon. Permit me, in this brief introductory comments, to speak first, seeking to unpack for you this topic, voicing God's twang. The term, voicing God's twang, the maturation of Caribbean hymnody, is above all else a statement of affirmation. It affirms that though our collective historical memory is still recovering from the trauma of colonization, and the story of the suffering of enslaved Africans, of whom we are their offsprings, we see ourselves still as the people of God. We see ourselves as a peculiar people. We are a distinctive people who live in a unique part of God's world, the Caribbean. We are one Caribbean, and as one Caribbean academic puts it, we are part African, part European, part Asian, part Native American, but totally Caribbean. We affirm then hybridity is part of our DNA. And so in voicing God's twang, we are indeed declaring, in essence, that through our hymns, text and music, that God's voice can be heard in a new way that it has never been heard before. So through the hymns that have been generated from among us, we as Caribbean people, Caribbean musicians and hymn writers are giving expression to our Christian faith. We are aiming to unpack Caribbean theology as we have come to understand it. We are aiming not only to do that, but more precisely to demonstrate what Don Saliers has advocated for in seeking to broaden the theological discourse and to include the branch of theology that he has so rightly coined as lyrical theology. Caribbean hymns, as they say to the world, as these hymns say to the world, is that we as Caribbean people have discovered and are in fact voicing God's accent, that accent that comes from our lips as we sing the faith. And by doing so, we are affirming the complexity of Caribbean music and just how deeply embedded that music is in our Caribbean psyche and culture. And so the task before us this evening is to recognize that in the writing of our hymns, we are seeking to ensure that faith communities sing these hymns that have been born out of a deep conviction that is ours as Caribbean people. And that deep conviction has been captured by the Caribbean theologian Cartwright Davis, who asserts that music is the Caribbean voice of God. And so for this very limited time that we have together, our goal is to express to you, expose to you rather, I should say, a sampling of Caribbean hymnody. And so for that, I would like for you to hold in your mind an image of a tree. The root of the tree is the regional ecumenical body called the Caribbean Conference of Churches that was instituted in 1973. The stem was the Caribbean Church Music Program with one mandate: to produce a Caribbean ecumenical hymnal. It had to be 100% Caribbean in terms of its content, and also in terms of all of the music had to be original Caribbean. It was never meant to replace the denominational hymnals, but rather to complement them. And so I'm going to ask Brian to show you the volume or the picture of what we call Sing a New Song number 2. Sing a New Song number 1 had 24 songs in it. And it was published first in 1973. And then Sing a New Song number 2 that you see on the screen was published in 1977. It had 40 songs. And that gave way to Sing a New Song number 3, which Brian will now show you. And Sing a New Song number 3 was published in 1981. Forgive my copies, you can tell that they are overused. And that Sing a New Song number 3 has 133 hymns. And with this publication, finally, a Caribbean hymnal had been achieved. Now, I make no apology when I say that you cannot appreciate and understand the value of Caribbean hymnody without having a very careful study of this particular hymnal. The hybridity about which I spoke earlier is clearly reflected throughout this hymnal. It is an eclectic hymnal in which you have not only English but non-English entries. It is also a hymnal that is very ecumenical in that the entire Caribbean denominational landscape was a part of this. And it is also very contextual in that it allowed us to sing for the first time, not just about winter and snow, but about things that we could relate to as Caribbean people, about trees, coconut trees and mangoes and those kind of things. So it gave us songs, words that we were accustomed to. So let us now fast forward to 1981, from 1981 to 2021. This year marks 40 years since the publication of Sing a New Song number 3. And from this tree trunk, several branches have grown across the Caribbean, as many of the major denominations now have their own hymnals. And I want you to just have an idea of some of these. First, we will look at the Anglican hymnal. So that is the Anglican hymnal. Philip will speak more about that. And then published in the Caribbean, after that was also, I'm going alphabetically, was the Baptist. And this is the Baptist from Jamaica. So it is basically the Jamaica Baptist Union. And then after that, we also can show you the hymns that were published by the Roman Catholic Church. And here we see one from the Diocese of St. Lucia, and also, keep scrolling down, Brian, also from the Jamaica, I probably sent you two things, the Jamaica Roman Catholic Church as well. And then the Voices in Praise is the hymnal for the Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas, a very widespread. And the final hymnal that has been published in recent years is the Moravian, Caribbean Moravian Praise, which also came, in addition to the hymnal, also an accompanying liturgy book. I'm not too sure if the picture for that is also there. And so, thank you, Brian. And so what we see emerging in these branches, even as they're taking shape, is in fact this attention to ensure that what had begun with Sing a New Song 1, 2, and 3 was indeed continuing to grow. I really must affirm this as I wrap up the introductory part. Through the Sing a New Song number 3, Caribbean Christians had indeed reframed their faith identity, voicing God's twang. And though through these 40 years, I assure you, and as we will see tonight, there has been an onslaught from external and internal forces to fell this tree. But thanks be to God, the tree is still standing, and we are indeed maturing. And the production of these major denominational hymnal is testimony to that we continue to voice God's twang, and that indeed it has not been muted. And so we will now hear a little bit more about these 3 hymnals. And I don't think George has yet arrived. So Philip will now tell us a little bit more about—
George is here.
Oh, George is here. Good, good. So George will tell us first off about the experience and also the content and the voicing of God's twang from the Methodist hymnal. Over to you, George.
Thank you, Mikey. The Caribbean hymnal, then, Voices in Praise, it really went through quite a long process because we had, as Caribbean people, Methodists that is, a hymn book by the Methodist Church in Britain. It was a hymn book that was produced in 1933. And those of us in the Caribbean as Methodists, we love this hymnal because of its doctrinal emphasis, and it expresses the theology of the universal church. And many persons treated this hymnal as sacrosanct. I suppose it is because of the classics that were contained in them, so that persons were not willing easily to give up this hymnal. However, in the 1970s, some interest developed in having a hymnal of our own, because at the time, I think as Caribbean people, we were wondering, how can we be fully Christian and fully Caribbean? And the interest then was to have hymns which reflected our lived cultural realities. So there would be no more singing about snow and winter, which we didn't experience, no singing about Greenland's icy mountains. And indeed, as a theological student, I was very much interested in the movement to include folk liturgies using guitars and drums, and of course the calypso beat and the reggae beat from the Caribbean. Now in 1973, the Caribbean Conference of Churches was inaugurated, and they had interest in promoting the spirit of ecumenism within the region. They organized workshops. There was an interest in Sunday school material reflecting the Caribbean realities, portraying Christ not as a white foreigner, but as one who could identify with the region. Now, Mikie expressed the fact that in 1981, we had the impetus from the Caribbean Conference of Churches with the Sing a New Song 3. And as he indicated, this had, I would say, the potential of becoming a regional hymn book. But there was not enough confidence, I think, for the denominations to depart from the hymnals which they had received from mother churches in Europe. Now, interestingly, we as Caribbean Methodists, we were holding on to the English hymn book, whereas the Methodists in England, they were producing other hymnals. For example, in 1983, they produced hymns and psalms. But I must say that in the 1990s, there was a definite interest among Methodists in having an indigenous hymn book for the region. I myself happen to be involved in a movement of the United Methodist Church in the United States, a movement called Global Praise. And Global Praise brought together on an annual basis musicians and hymn composers from across the world, including, Sweden and Germany, Taiwan, Russia, Singapore, Zimbabwe, Cote d'Ivoire, United States of America, England, Caribbean, and Latin American territories. So one of the things that Global Praise succeeded in doing is to produce a CD entitled Caribbean Praise. And this Caribbean Praise, I think, gave us some impetus to ensure that we would put together a hymnal reflective of the region's rhythms and so on. Now, for example, we have Papiamento, which is one of the languages sung within the Caribbean. And included in it is a hymn which goes like this. Kindesi tamirumang tukusko Christwa pontronte. Ela mira rondije ya bisa mira atana. Wasi escuha si volunta de Dios se tamirumang. Ha si volunta de Dios y Cristo no tan nos remang. Ha si volunta de Dios y nos ta romang, which in the English is those who do the will of God are Jesus Christ's own family. Those who do the will of God are God's family. That goes with a nice little Castilian beat, I think, But we had also included in this hymnal, or we have included in this hymnal some hymns in the Jamaican dialect. Black up, sunrise, and people say we're black up. But the Spirit of the Lord fly down like a fire. But we in the Spirit like a choir, saying higher, 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 fire. And that hymn speaks to our people, because black up means drunk. So black up, drunk, question is, when the Holy Spirit manifested itself in speaking of tongues and so on, were these people drunk? And so in this Voices in Praise hymnal, you have quite a collection reflecting our Caribbean hymns, whether they come out of Suriname or the Dutch Antilles, or whether they come from Haiti. Haiti definitely produced quite a number of songs. There is one which says, "De bonté li pap jam fini," his goodness never fails. And that, of course, is a reflection of the 23rd Psalm. L'Éternel, c'est you, mon bonté li pap jam fini. Si c'est lui même qui sauve, moi pap jam manqué ailleurs. Oh oui, moi connais, oh oui, moi connais, oh oui, moi connais, non Jésus puissance, oh oui, moi connais, oh oui, moi connais, oh oui, moi connais, non Jésus gagne puissance, which means, translating from the Haitian, oh yes, I know, oh yes, I do know that there is power in the name of Jesus. Now, when I served in the country known as Antigua and Barbuda, which is a very sacred place, I served as the connectional president or bishop of the MCCA, and we were convinced that it was time to move to this new hymnal. And so I developed a friendship with someone by the name of George Roberts, Dr. Roberts. He was himself a musician, ENT specialist, a medical person, but we produced quite a number of hymns and so on. And you know what is interesting? When we try to ensure that people in Antigua love to sing these songs, they were reluctant. I think they were reluctant because they were wondering, is it okay for us to sing in God's twang, to sing as Caribbean people? But then, as I say, it took a mighty long time before the churches in the region appreciated the importance of singing hymns that reflected their own language, the musical rhythms. The reason, for long we tended to look down on our own creations. We tended to think of our language as broken English or patois, although these were heart languages or are heart languages. So that's just to give you an insight into the Caribbean hymnody. My time is gone, and so I must yield to someone else. Thank you, Mikie.
Thank you so much, George. And to those who are participating this evening, please, you can keep sending your questions. We will take questions at the very end, but you can certainly make a note of any question that you may have. And now we're going to go to Philip Ford, who will now give us the perspective of the Anglican hymnal that was done for the Caribbean.
Hello, everyone. I sat on the panel that decided and selected the hymns to be included in the Caribbean Anglican hymn book. From what I gather, the original mandate was to gather hymns written from all the various dioceses in the Caribbean and come together and decide which ones we would include in this new hymn book. But we always felt, we were mandated, I should say, to include some of the older hymns also. I gather that was the original mandate. But what actually happened was that the word did not get out to the various churches and territories to send in their hymns. So that was where the system fell down. So what we actually did was this, or the rationale behind what we did was this. We found ourselves in a situation in the Anglican Church in the Caribbean where various territories were using various books. And actually I'll speak to Barbados later on, and there were several books that we use in Barbados, although it's a small island. So we had the first edition of the Asian Modern was still very, very popular in the Caribbean. And as it previous speaker said, England had moved on. And I gathered that they were just printing Asian moderns for the Caribbean market because they had moved on to other hymnals. So we had a large following of the Asian moderns still, but then we had some territories that moved on to the Common Praise. That was another book that we used. Mission Praise came, that was another book that was used. Hymns Ancient and Modern Revised was another hymn. And actually in Barbados, in the church that I serve at now, St. James Parish Church, we actually used the English hymnal. So we had a case where various hymnals were being used throughout the province. And I think it was decided that we should amalgamate all these different hymnals into one hymn book for the whole region. So what we did in the panel discussions, we went through all the hymn books that were used by Anglicans in the Caribbean, and we selected those hymns that were actually sung. Because what you would find is that, let us say, for example, in hymns Asian Modern, we only sang a small selection, relatively small selection of the total number of hymns there. So a lot of hymns that we never sung, and that was the same case in all the other hymnals that were used. So what we did was to put together the hymns in one book, the hymns that we actually sing throughout the various territories. And we included some Caribbean stuff also. But the hymn book is very conservative in that it is mostly the traditional hymns that are in this hymn book, with a few Caribbean hymns. Now, the Caribbean hymns that we have included are mainly four sections or four types. And I'll attempt to share my screen with you and show you the examples of the hymns that I'm going to speak about now. We've had some cases where the words are Caribbean, new words written by people in the Caribbean, but the tunes are traditional tunes. We have cases where the words are traditional and tunes were written by Caribbean musicians. We also have some that are folk songs. The tunes are taken from folk songs. We have one from Jamaica that I will share with you shortly. And then we have one that I don't think was written the church in mind at all. It's a hymn by, well, not hymn, it's in the hymn book. I guess I can call it a hymn, but it's a song by Ernie Smith, All for Jesus. I don't think when Ernie Smith wrote this, he would have ever imagined it would be in an Anglican hymn book. But there we have it. And people have responded very well to the inclusion of the Caribbean hymns. Like I said, it's a very conservative book because most of the hymns are older hymns written in England and various things like that. So what I'm going to attempt to do now, I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you and show you some of the examples of the hymns I just spoke about. And then I will, depending on time, I could delve into some other concerns I have and suggestions I have on the way forward in Caribbean music. Or maybe I could do this in the question and answer section. So just give me a second. I'm not very technologically savvy, so give me a second. If it's taking too long, we'll talk about other things that I have a concern about. I thought I had it set up, but clearly it is not working the way I thought it would work. So just give me a second. While I get this set up, I will talk about some challenges I have when it comes to Caribbean hymnody. I feel that if I had my way, I would like the people who are the people who are writing hymns and writing hymn tunes to approach it from a more scholarly point of view. And I'm sure that this might be a controversial comment, but and I'm willing to discuss it in the question and answer section. But what we would wish to happen in the Caribbean is that we get the best poets and the best musicians writing these hymns, right? So that the standard of, although it's Caribbean, that the standard of writing in terms of music and words, lyrics, is of a very high standard, right? There's nothing wrong with people writing hymns as they wish because they're inspired to write a hymn. But I, for one, feel that it would benefit these people who are creative, obviously, to study Hymnody, the writing of hymns, and study, if they're musicians, well, you know, have some good musical background before they, you know, attempt to write these things, because creativity is one thing, but I believe that training also is very important. I'm having difficulty here trying to do this.
You have about 5 minutes, so you can figure out what to do, or if you want to.
What I can do, I was hoping to share it with you, but what I can do is I can actually read some of the words and sing some of the tunes. And what I can do is make the screenshots or the PDFs, if I get a chance to do that, make them available so that it can be shared later on. I can do that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I mean, I actually tried this before the thing started and it worked very well. So I'm not sure what the issue is. Anyhow, so the first one I'm going to look at is one written by a Barbadian from my church. It was written for the dedication of a church, and we use it at St. James Church every year, because not only because she's a member of St. James Church, but because it's a good hymn. And the words go like this, the first verse. O God, who is the breath of life, help us to feel your power of love, that all our days may be renewed, and life that maketh all things new. And it goes on to talk about the building of the church. These walls were built so long ago by faithful men long gone before, with skill and knowledge given them by God's right hand that guided them. But for this, we use the tune Malcolm for that tune. The other hymn I'm going to speak about is God made me for himself. God made me for himself to serve him here. Right? These are traditional words, but Canon Lionel Burke, who was a priest, but also a musician, he wrote a tune to this hymn. Now, I'm sorry I can't share this with you, but if I can before the session finishes, I'll send them. But what is interesting about this and might raise some concerns is that this will cause us to ask, what is Caribbean music? Because although it's written by a Caribbean person, it is written in a very traditional style. There are no syncopated rhythms here. Pretty much standard harmony. He has, you know, some added sevenths and ninths and things like that to make it interesting, but it's a very traditional tune, very traditional hymn. It doesn't have in the rhythms that one associate with Caribbean music. And that's a discussion I've had with several people. What makes a piece of music or a hymn Caribbean music? Must it contain Caribbean language or Caribbean rhythms, or is it just okay for it to be written by a Caribbean person? I know my time is going quick. The next one I'm going to look at is one that, traditional words again, letters, talents, and tongues employed, reaching out with a shout of joy. Bread is broken, the wine is poured, Christ is spoken and seen and heard. But we sing this to a Jamaican folk song called Linstead Market, which I can sing for you now. I'll try to sing the first verse for you. Letters, talents, and tongues employ, reaching out for a shout of joy. Bread is broken and wine is poured, Christ is spoken and seen and heard. Jesus lives again, earth and breathe again. Pass the word of wrong loaves abound. Right? So this is using a folk song now with traditional words. And you can argue that some people would think that's more Caribbean. And then the final one I'm looking at is the one I mentioned by Ernie Smith, All for Jesus, a lovely song. Like I said, probably not written with the church in mind, but written on a religious topic. Jesus come today for a poor man, for a poor man like me. Salvation come my way, my soul set free. Jesus come for all. We must hear his call. Open up your hearts today and let it be. No matter if you thief or if you dread, or if you have a crown upon your head, no matter if you have no heart at all, Jesus bring love for one and all. Sing it, children. I for Jesus, you for Jesus, all for Jesus, fall for Jesus, come to Jesus. Jesus come for one, Jesus come for all. So this not only has a tune that probably you can argue represents the Caribbean more in terms of its rhythms and its silences and its syncopation, but also it has some Jamaican dialect in it, right? So we have 4 examples of the hymns, Caribbean hymns that we have included in the Anglican hymn book. Is my time up? I wasn't checking.
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about not being able to share these shots with you, but I'll make them available as soon as I can.
Thank you so much, Philip. And it's good to hear the chimes in the background.
Yes.
at least making music, making
music.
Yeah. And having now looked at the branch of the Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas, and Philip giving attention to the Anglicans, I will speak for the next few moments on the Moravian Church. Before I begin, I want to give kudos to my colleague who will be speaking later, Patmore Alston-Smith. At the time of this publication, Patmore and I would have been working together in terms of the Moravian Church in the Eastern Caribbean. The work would have started actually on the Moravian hymnal since 1999. We are thankful to God that it finally got to the printery in 2016. So somewhere of a teenager, and as teenagers behave all over, it was quite a bit of a rough season. The Moravian Church in the East and West Indies, similarly to the situation of the Methodists and the Anglicans, is comprised of 6 islands from Antigua, Barbados, Trinidad, Tobago, the US and the British Virgin Islands, and also the country of St. Kitts. When we started working on the hymnal, we also made sure that we collaborated with the Moravian province in Jamaica and Cayman Islands. So it really became a whole Caribbean approach. We in the Eastern Caribbean worked on the hymns, and the Jamaica province paid attention to the liturgies. We had to go through a number of discussions because, as was the case in the Anglican Church and the Methodist Church, we had inherited the British Moravian hymnal. And what was rather interesting, similarly, the British Moravian province had moved on. In fact, they had not only moved on to other hymnals, but they had also published their own hymnal following the one that we were using, which was 1960. There were still some members in our congregation who even preferred the 1910. So there was this long, and George so rightly articulated, for many who saw these British hymnals sometimes even more dear than the Bible, the printed Bible. It was their printed Bible. They did more singing of these hymns than the reciting of scriptures. And so we really had to, first of all, acknowledge the value of these hymns. And because part of our province is under the jurisdiction of the United States, then also the North American Moravian hymnal was also very, very popular. Again, the 1960 edition and the later edition that the Moravians in North America had published. So we were in this very precarious position where you are trying to create something new, trying to have people to embrace it, while at the same time not snatching what they are accustomed to from their hands. And so we had to find a way to make sure that we brought people along with us, especially because we are spread out over so many islands. And so one of the things that we made sure is that our hymnal committee was made up of persons from all of the islands. We also did a survey where we sent out, like the Anglicans, finding out what did people sing, because the British hymnal had 710 hymns, and half of it, was not being sung. And then when we got that feedback, we then not only looked at what people were singing, but we also asked the question, were there hymns that people were not singing that we also felt they were so sound in their theology that we still needed to maintain them and to see if somehow we could give them, a shot in the arm and give them new life. So that was our goal, to still keep some of the hymns from the British hymnal. Our second source was that in the Caribbean, the good old Sankey, the sacred songs and solos, was dear, 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 dear to people's heart. What can wash away my sins? And all of those. So going back from that Sankey white gospel era, we then asked for persons to indicate which of that particular, if you want to call it white Southern gospel kind of Ira D. Sankey, Great American Revival period, that they also still were singing. And then we included some of those, again, mindful that there were those who were very attached to that. And then we also made an appeal for our own Moravians in the Caribbean to write hymns. And like Philip said, we had some challenges because some of those hymns that we received, there are some cases where we had to do some work to tweak the language, or in some cases, try to figure out the rhythm, making sure there was a real matching of text and tune and those kind of things. But we were very, very happy for the response that we got from that particular stream of revenue, if I may use that term. And then, of course, we went to the Sing a New Song, and we then looked at what from Sing a New Song we needed to bring over. So yes, there were the right hand of God and enter into Jerusalem, but we also took some time to also dig into the Sing a New Song, mindful that it was no longer being published, and we needed now to make sure that that legacy was not lost. And so in the end, we ended up with a Moravian hymnal that had 735 hymns. 735. We had to find a number to stop. So don't ask me how we got to 735. We just felt it was big enough at 735. And what we also then did was also publish as well the liturgy book. What was interesting about putting the liturgy book together is that in the same approach, or the same approach that we took with the hymnal, we also took with the liturgy book, in that we made sure that our own people were now writing prayers to coincide with the liturgical calendar. So for example, the British hymnal had only provided liturgies for the first and second Sunday of Advent. We were conscious that there were 4 Sundays in Advent. And so at that point in time, we felt, let us push the envelope, and we actually challenged our pastors who were well known for writing liturgies. And so we prepared the liturgies now for the 3rd Sunday and the 4th Sunday. Because it was also our hymnal and our old liturgy book, we then also included liturgies that dealt with topics that before the British hymnal would not have looked into. For example, Emancipation Day. We now had a liturgy to deal with that, and that could be celebrated. And we also included things such as the renewal of marriage vows. And we really sought to expand the liturgy book, and we printed it as a separate volume than the hymnal. So in essence, we were always trying to deal with this idea of balanced singing, and to make sure that our elderly members did not see this new hymnal and thought it strange, And at the same time, those who were of the younger generation, we also wanted to make sure that their own hymnic memory bank was also not going to be deprived of the rich heritage of, if you want to call it, traditional Western hymnody. But we also had to realize, like the Methodists, that Wesley was not the only one who could write hymns, or for the Anglicans, you know, that Havergal was not the only hymn writer. And for us as Moravians, that Zinzendorf was not the only one who gave us hymns to sing. And so we really sought to ensure that our members had a voice. And so what I wanted to share with you now is just some samples of some of the hymns. And you will see from what Philip said, this idea of what is Caribbean was something that we did not allow ourselves to be distracted with, because we figured we did not want to have this typical just rendition of once it was Caribbean, it had to be rhythmic. Our understanding was it was Caribbean because the person who wrote it was from the Caribbean, and that the text and the tune were from the Caribbean, which goes back to the hybridity, because we're part Asian, part this, part that, you know. At the end of the day, the whole world came to the Caribbean. And so we are as comfortable in something that is straight and as well as something that is quite syncopated. So here are some of the samples. Brian, if you pull up the first one, number 30, You Are Wonderful, came from Alberta Titus, from one of our members from Trinidad. And I am not going to sing all of these verses for you, but just to sort of let you see an idea of what we came up with. And you are wonderful, you are marvelous, you are good, oh Lord, to me. You are faithful, you're incomparable, you are good, oh Lord, to me. In the annals of creation, and so on and so forth. Now, Caribbean music is, let me put it this way, Caribbean musicians, what we have printed is simply a roadmap. We add and take away as, we love to improvise. So this same song can be sung in so many different ways as you go from the Caribbean, from one place to the next. So that came from Alberta Titus, and that is an example of original text and original music. Then 464 is the next one I want Brian to look at. And this falls into what Philip would have talked about, where we had someone who wrote original text, but we then applied a known tune, Bishop Thorpe, and really, really powerful text. I'll praise the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul and might. I'll praise him in the darkest hours and in the sun. Anyhow, so what we had to do when we got those original texts and the person may have suggested a tune, we then as the committee had to really look and figure out, okay, is this a good match, or is there another CM that we could apply to it? We did that because we did not want to have a hymnal where every new text also had to be coupled with a new tune. Another one, 583, is an example of new text and new tune. For new text, new tune. So this is where Pat and I collaborated. Thirst for Christ so deep within, he calls to me and says, come drink. I hunger for the bread divine. He welcomes me to come and dine. And we put that in our communion section. So that's new text, new tune. The next example belongs to what we call songs that are to be sung by Moravians. So this is one of those times where we got very, if I may put it, we got very tribal at one point in time. And these are in the part of the hymn book where we call it for special Moravian occasions. And this one came to us from Barbados, new text, new tune. Moravians have been waging a war throughout the Caribbean lands. When deep in darkness our souls abiding, Moravians brought us light. Missionaries risked their lives to fill a long and aching void. They fought many Christian battles, as people know we can take pride. We are Moravians, living for Jesus, working for Jesus and fighting for Jesus, winning souls for Jesus and rallying around the land. And of course, you know, Lamb has conquered, let us follow him. And so that sort of became one of our rallying cry. And then the last example is, this is actually Ulston's sister, who did a very wonderful arrangement of the Lord's Prayer. And Ulston would have done the arrangement in terms of this and actually named it after his father. So I guess you can call it a sibling collaboration. Often in heaven, hallowed be your name. On earth your kingdom come, as in heaven your will be done. Dear Father, let your kingdom come. Holy Father, let your kingdom come. Jesus, let your will be done, and let your kingdom come. So a very wonderful arrangement of the Lord's Prayer. So what we were able to do throughout the 735 hymns was to make sure that we intentionally juxtaposed our Caribbean entries right alongside the so-called traditional entries in terms of Christian hymnody. And I think by and large, it has been well received, and we have so far done just the words only. Ulston, remember him in your prayers, because
Not hearing you, Mikey.
in the Caribbean.
Hey, Mikey, you've gotten really, really soft. I'm not sure why. Maybe right at the end of that last song.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me still?
No, it's very, very quiet.
Hold a minute.
Now you're all the way gone.
How is that now? Hello, can you hear me?
Very soft.
No.
It's very, very soft still. I can hear you, but it's just quite soft.
Okay, right. Let's move on to Roger Gittins.
Okay.
So we can go on to Roger Gittins, and I'll go out and come back in.
Oh, it just got louder again. All right, Roger.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Okay. So, as Mikey said earlier, there's a tree, as he described it, where Caribbean Hymnody is concerned, and he says, you know, that there are roots, trunk, and branches, and I take it I'm here because I'm part of the branches and maybe the blossoms coming out at the end. I would have grown up in the 70s singing some of the songs that he would have mentioned actually. Pearl Mulrain's, who's George's sister, her Send the Youth Quick was a favorite of ours. Pat Prescott's Right Hand of God, Noah Dexter's Oh Praise Ye the Lord. Those were standards for us growing up in the Methodist Church in youth group in the 70s and the 80s. And when the VIP came out, we readily adopted it. And my role as organist at our church was pretty much to play what our ministers would have asked us, would have asked for hymns. And one of the things I did, I did a few workshops to get us to learn some of the new hymns that we were not familiar with in the Southern Caribbean. But my own work has been primarily, I think, if writing tunes to hymns, and also writing some new hymns. So I will not talk as much. I'll have you listen over the next few minutes. The first one, Brian, that we're going to listen to is a tune that I wrote to number 4 in the old hymn book, that 1933 hymn book that we had, from All That Dwell Below the Skies. And this one, this hymn we use at my church as a choral introit. So Brian, if you can play it so that we have an idea. All right, so this is Love, actually. So,
sorry, do you want
yeah, so from All That Dwell, I would have sent you them in order, sorry. So number 1, yeah.
Sorry, bear with me just a second.
Yeah, that's okay. Right. So as I said, this is taking the words and the text and writing a Caribbean style melody to it.
Is that the right one?
Correct. So as I said, we use that as an introit at my church, and in my neck of the woods, the two big festivals tend to be Christmas and Harvest, and some of my work would have been primarily for those 2 festivals. So the next thing we're going to listen to is We Plow the Fields and Scatter. We listened to some of this, and this was intended and performed by our choir for Harvest. So again, it's the traditional words, but marrying it with a new tune, which is Caribbean in nature. You can go for it, Brian. Brian, that's good. So one of the things I've tried to do over the years is marry my knowledge of harmony and my experiences with Caribbean music, and marry those to the hymns I've selected, and try to create Caribbean, using Caribbean type melodies, syncopated melodies, if you wish, but also delving into some of the harmonies that you ordinarily would not find, say, in a traditional calypso, or you may not find, say, for example, in the traditional type of Caribbean tune that we would sing in church. The next piece is actually congregational. This is the first hymn that I wrote a melody to. This is When Morning Gilds the Skies, and this is congregational. It was not meant for necessary for choral presentation. And right, so let's listen to a bit of When Morning Gilds the Skies. Thanks, Brian. Right. So the verses 4, 5, and 6 follow the same format. 4 and 5 are like 1 and 2, and then 6 is like 3. So as you said, that's more congregational setting for those words. Interestingly enough, about, I think it must be maybe 20 years ago or so, I met this guy called Mikie Roberts, who was stationed, a Moravian minister who was stationed in Barbados. And we worked together at the Barbados Community College, and he did some wonderful work at the college, really enhanced our voice program. We are still reaping the benefits from the changes that he made way back then. But one of the things that he asked me to do was to set a psalm to music. He was doing an evening, I guess, an evening of psalms with the Moravian choir, and he wanted a psalm, psalm set. And I decided set 121. I never thought of setting a psalm to music before, so I blame Mikie for this. But what it did, it set me on a path where I've been setting psalms now for a while. It's one of the most interesting things I enjoy. So let's listen to a bit of this. This is Psalm 121. I purposely chose something brief. I think just has 6 verses, so I would not extend myself. And this is Psalm 121. So thank you. So you can blame Mikie, as I said, for that one. So the next piece, Brian, will be Love, which was the clip that you were going to show. So we don't just do calypso in the Caribbean, and those pieces were pretty much based on calypso type beats. We also have reggae. So one of the things I've explored is using reggae as well to create melodies and arrangements. So this is a reggae piece based on 2 Corinthians chapter 13. All right, it's a live performance. So Brian, we got to go. Yeah. So I think I'm pretty much run out of time. So if I can just have 1 minute, Mikie, just to do one last piece. So that was a reggae selection, and you would have, I guess it opened with Brian playing a bit of Over 1,000 Tongues to Sing. So I'm an unrepentant Methodist, and this is my my version of Wesley's fantastic hymn, Or for 1,000 Tongues to Sing. So just listen to a bit of this as we go.
Assist me to progress.
Right. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me now? Yes.
Better.
Okay. Okay, good, Brian. Good. Sorry about that. Welcome to COVID online. I was about to say while I went off is that the next three presenters, if we saw they sing a new song as the trunk and the hymnal as the branches, that Roger, Joanne, and Alston represents what I want to see as the blossoms, the parts that are still blossoming, still producing, and really still keeping the whole process of our Caribbean hymnal legacy moving forward. So you heard from Roger. Now let's go to Joanne. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. I am really happy and feel honored to be here among these gentlemen who, especially if I may single out Reverend Moravian, who has been so encouraging over the years. Every time he calls me, I know I'm going to hear him singing, "Nothing, no day, that God can do." And I should probably respond with, "I just want to follow Jesus." Yes. So anyway, as was said, my name is Joanne Richards-Goff, and what I have done, because I love to tell stories and sing songs, I decided that so that I will not go over my allotted time, I would write my presentation. So I'm here to share my story of my involvement in the development of the Jamaican Hymnody. And I want to apologize to you that I do not have a soundproof room. And so I realize that my neighbors have decided that now is the time to mow their lawn closest to where I am. Anyway, in 2012, I went to Burkina Faso in West Africa to work with Wycliffe Bible translators. My assignment was to work alongside the ethnomusicologist who was stationed there, helping her to conduct songwriting workshops in which the church musicians would write new songs for the church that used their own language and their own music. Now, this involved doing formal and informal research into the various genres of music that they had, teaching them aspects of songwriting, then inspiring, motivating, and guiding them in writing new songs. Eventually, they would have a brief rehearsal of the new songs, and then we would record them, edit them, and present them with CDs containing the new collections of songs. So they would use them in worship and evangelism, playing them on the radio stations and in the marketplace and anywhere else that they deemed convenient. So eventually, less than 2 years later, I returned home to Jamaica, and my new area of assignment with the organization was the Americas area, which included the Caribbean, which included my home country, Jamaica. Gradually, it had been dawning on me that I was helping others to have what my own home country did not have: a collection of songs for worship that used our own language and our own music genre. Although musicians and songwriters in other countries that I worked in, and especially in Peru, they really did a good job. They realized that I was not going to be there to do this work for them, so they had to do it for themselves. Somehow, this was not the case in Jamaica. And I want to just insert here, I don't want to make it seem as if we did not have any songs, because as has been said, we had Barish Evans, Professor Barish Evans, we had Noel Dexter, Father Richard Holong, and all those others who were writing in the revival era. So that's that whole story right there. So I just didn't seem to be able, though, to mobilize a strong movement of Jamaican worship or Christian songwriters to write songs that were culturally relevant to be added to our worship song repertoire. So eventually, God started giving me songs, and I started introducing them at seminars on congregational music and cultural identity. And people kept asking if I didn't have them on CD so that they could learn them. So that is how the Come Make We Worship series started. And Brian, if you could just put up that slide with the album cover and just a little synopsis. So that was how the Come Make We Worship. And for those who are not familiar with the Jamaican language, it simply means come, let us worship. So yes, going back to my script, we now have 2 in the series. So the Come Make We Worship, it's a collection of songs based on scripture using Jamaican language and Jamaican music to be added to the repertoire of the Jamaican worship music. So we now have 2 in the series and are hoping to keep adding. The second one is based on the book of Revelation. As you know, the book of Revelation is full of worship songs. And so the second album has worship songs from the book of Revelation primarily. And hopefully the next one will be a children's album, because we notice that our children do not currently have any culturally relevant music for worship and are singing the same songs that we sang when we were their age. So the first seminar that I conducted in Jamaica was really about sharing what I was doing in Burkina Faso. We had a panel that included the late Professor Barish Evans, who is also famous for writing culturally relevant songs for the Jamaican church, as I mentioned before. 2 of the best known are Blacker, Sunrise. Yes, you heard that one earlier. And one that is known as A Ghetto Carol. Early Christmas morning when the star them getting thin. From a squatter's window, woman start to sing. Holy, 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 kneel. Fi we, Lord, great, fi true. Fi we, Lord, great. Yes, that was Professor Barish Evans' creation. He was responsible for a portion of what I like to call my radicalization. In that, he pointed out to me that it wasn't just the language and the music that needed to be addressed in making our worship culturally relevant, but the whole mindset of our people. Eventually, I left the organization, that's Wycliffe Bible Translators, when I realized that the people, the Jamaican people now, expected me to be the one to raise up an indigenous movement of new songs using our own language and our own music genre. And that if I tried to do this while being a member of and taking directives from a foreign organization, this would not appear to be authentic. In 2010, Crew 44 was born, an organization focused on spreading the message of Jesus Christ through culturally relevant expressions of worship. And let me just make sure, yes, we are still here. I have to, because I'm looking at my screen, but I want to make sure we're all still here. So we do this through training and mentoring, through modeling what this would look like, through publishing and production. And we want to pause here. Brian, could you please share the 2 video clips I sent to you? I don't think I told you where I want you to share it. So
yes, which one first?
Which one first? The first one is Nothing No Day. The one with me singing alone. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So what I'm going to share is just one is with me sharing in a, it actually wasn't a church service. They were doing a seminar on worship and music and invited me to share. And it was within that context that I was sharing this particular song, which has become perhaps the most widely known song from the Come Make We Worship album. Oh, okay. This was actually at Bethel Baptist Church, yes. God can do. Nothing that God can do. Nothing at all that God can do. Okay, we don't have much time left. So, Brian, we're going to move on to just a little piece of the next one. Yes, time has crept upon us. So we move on to just a little piece of the next one, which was a team of young people that we were now mentoring. And this was actually in the open air, if you know a place called Hollywell. Yes, let's just listen to a little piece of this one. And every eye I will see you. This is from Revelation 1, verse 7. Rich and poor, every eye I will see. Black, white, every eye I will see. All right, let's move on. Something tells me we are going to run out of time, Brother Mikey. So the papers that I have presented at the conference on congregational music at the Ripon College in the UK have represented my own development in understanding of the need for cultural relevance in worship in Jamaica and the Caribbean. The first paper was entitled, Can I Be Truly Jamaican and Truly Christian? Exploring congregational music and cultural identity in the Evangelical Church in Jamaica. And this was my own story, actually, because I grew up in a typical evangelical church in Jamaica. One of the things that was highlighted was that using the language of the people in the church's liturgy was a matter of social justice. And it was also in this paper that I proposed that the likely logic behind the birth of Rastafari was that here was a people to whom worship was essential. It was not an option. However, the gatekeepers insisted that in order for them to be a part of their worship, they had to shed their own identity and take on the identity of the colonizers. This must have seemed to them to go against the very essence of worship, which is taking your authentic self to your creator. And so they were left with no alternative but to find an alternative. The second paper presented in 2015, Are We Singing Our Freedom? Examining the impact of Caribbean theology on Jamaican hymnody in select established churches in Kingston. And I will have to say, in this paper, I didn't know that when I wrote this paper that I'll be meeting with the gentleman I'm meeting today, but I moved beyond my own experience to discover what others were doing and did a surface exploration of the Caribbean hymnals, as well as explored what was happening in 5 churches in Kingston that were at some point led by significant leaders in the Caribbean theology projects. And I list the churches that were used, but it was the Anglican Church. We discovered in looking at the hymnals, the Anglican Church had a Crusade Songs of the Anglican Church published in 1971. 26% of the songs had Caribbean composers or arrangers. Then the Anglican one, when we examined it, and I listened very carefully to what my brother had to say, 3.75% of the songs published in 2012 were written or arranged by Caribbeans. The Voices in Praise Methodist hymnal in 2013, 10%. The Moravian, 3.6%. And the Caribbean Baptist Praise and Worship, 3%. Now, we came out with a magazine. I'm going to just jump to the bottom here. In 2018, which it's called the KW, Comical Worship Magazine, Crucial Connections in Faith and Culture. The aim of it is to facilitate conversations about worship and cultural identity among Christ followers, primarily of African descent, both on the African continent and in her diasporas. And through this means, we want to get to know ourselves better, to get to know each other better, and ultimately to develop deeper, more authentic relationships with God. Among other things, the magazine contains music scores, so I will be sending you the link so that you can see some of the songs. So far, we've only used songs from the Comical Worship series, but I'm really looking forward to including songs from some of our panelists here in the future. And another feature is the Vox Pop, and this is what I'm going to end with by sharing the results of the most recent Vox Pop. Brian, that's where we're at, and that's where we're ending. Can we bring up that slide that shows we asked three primary questions. In your opinion, what percentage, notice it's an opinion, what percentage of the songs used in your church community are your own? And the vast majority at 42.9% to 28.6%, you can see it's a vast majority say that it is less than 30% that uses the music genre of their own people. The next slide is asking, in your opinion, what percentage of the songs in your church community should be your own? And there again, a large percentage, that purple section is 70 to 90%. The green section is 50 to 70%. The blue section beside the purple is more than 90%. That's what the people think should be used in their church community. And then that last slide asks, what's your favorite style of music for corporate worship? And I should tell you that we had, I want to do this again, and if you want to help me, just let me know, because we had a large number of Seventh-day Adventists, and we also had United Church. Most of the Seventh-day Adventists responded hymns. 50.6% of all the 83 people said hymns, and then 24.1% said Hillsongs or contemporary Christian music, and most of those were from the United Church. The other, call it 25%, squish everybody, reggae, revival, calypso, hip hop, mix of everything. That's less than 25%. So the question is, and I know I am out of time now, the question is why? Why is there this distance between what is and what should be, or what the people think should be? Is it a lack of knowledge of self and culture? Is it because of fear based on what we were taught is acceptable in the worship space? Is it a lack of motivation on the part of the leaders? Is it that the media is not playing enough of the people's songs, so they're not even hearing it in order to desire it? Is it simple? The musicians are unable to play the culturally relevant music because their training was toward Western music only. And I see a lot of room there for more study, more survey, and more interaction with our people. That is where I'm going to stop today, in Jesus' name. Until the questions.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you so much, Joy. And I'm going to go straight to Ulston.
Okay.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. We will come to realize within this conversation that when we speak of the twang from the Caribbean, we're talking about a plural idea and not a singular one. And so in a nutshell, in the Caribbean, we use whatever we can, whenever we can, to worship God. Now, one of the misconceptions I think we have is that when we try to define Caribbean and Caribbean culture and Caribbean music, especially in church, is that it has to be some form of reggae, calypso, soca, or perhaps even steel pan inside of the music. And so the first recording I wanted to share is so different. It's very traditional. The music for this is original music and original text. The music was composed for a hymn from the Methodist hymnal, Silence, Frenzied, Unclean Spirit. I would have done this when I was in grad school with Dr. Michael Horn. And the text was composed for someone who was having some challenges in faith, in health, and so on. And so this is the first recording I want us to listen to from a Caribbean perspective. So Brian, this is Courage When the Storms Are Raging, number 1. second piece I want to share, in this recording, I wanted to demonstrate that in the Caribbean, we pay attention to stylistic forms, tempo variation, and what I call a motivic extraction. And by motivic extraction, what I mean is that there's a phrase or a portion of the hymn or the song that is taken out. It is repeated for emphasis, affect, and effect. This is a very simple chorus that we do very often, I'm sure, around the world. And I remember doing this song, and at the end of the song, at least the congregation had finished singing and we had come to the end. And I just started pounding my fist on the table where the keyboard was set up and stomping my feet really loudly, boom, boom. And the worship leader looked across like, what is happening? And then I started this chant, the angels bow before him, heaven and earth adore him, over and over and over. And the congregation started singing that, and that took on a life of its own. You can recall, I believe, how you would normally sing it, but listen to the recording in terms of what I would have prepared, in terms of how it kind of went.
What a mighty God we serve! What a mighty God we serve! The angels bow before heaven and earth adore him. What a mighty God we serve! What a mighty God! What a mighty God we serve! What a mighty God we serve! The angels bow before heaven and earth adore him. What a mighty God we serve. The angels bow before him, heaven and earth adore him. What a mighty God we serve. Oh, the angels bow before him, heaven and earth adore him. What a mighty God we serve.
Thirdly, and very quickly, another original piece that I want to bring to our attention, because I'm always thinking about performance practice. And when I wrote this particular song, I was thinking of it being a very reflective piece of music, very reverent, as a matter of fact. It was at a time when I was personally searching God for a new and deeper relationship. And so I wrote this song, and I had this sort of mood in mind. In the morning, Lord, we praise your holy name. In the night time, we worship at your throne. Holy Jesus, we want to see your face. We worship you. So this was altar call type of mood I was trying to recreate with this song. And then as performance practice goes in the Caribbean, I went to one of our combined worship in a different country. And the person in charge told me, Patmo, be patient. You're going to hear one of your songs, but a little different from how you would have suggested. So play the third recording, and that will be the end of my presentation for this part here, Brother Mikey.
Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. So, to those who are here with us from the Hymn Society, we are now ready for any questions you may have. Brian will facilitate them. And let me just personally thank all of these Caribbean friends of mine whom I have journeyed with over these years, one way or the other. And in case if I just end with Pat Moore just did, somebody may be asking which one is right. That's the wrong question, because both are right. So it's not which one is right, simply which do you use or which version do you perform depends as the Spirit is leading, because both renditions are very much right. So thank you. And we now await any questions, and I turn it over to you, Brian. And as we hear the questions, we'll try to figure out who among us can best give an answer.
So there are a couple of kind of quick housekeeping questions that can probably be answered rather simply. And so I'll do those first, and then we'll go into some that may need a little bit more chewing. The first is from Dr. Monique Ingalls. She says, Dr. Roberts, when you have a chance, could you please give the name of the article from Courtwright Davis that discusses the importance of music to Caribbean theology?
Okay, it's a book actually called Emancipation Still Coming, but Monique, I'll send you an email. It's a wonderful text, Emancipation Still Coming, Dr. Courtwright Davis, but okay, good.
All right, and then the next one is Mikie. Do you have do the Moravian congregations in New York City and Florida, which are primarily Caribbean, use the Caribbean Moravian praise hymnal and liturgy books?
They have been requesting its use. The problem we had is that we sold out of our first print. We sold out again of our second print, and so we are
terrible problem.
We are heading to third print, and we hope that in that third print to deal with the Caribbean diaspora. But we have certainly had their requests, and as you said, the congregations also in Toronto, New York, have also been making their requests known. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. So here's one that may need a little chewing, and multiple people chiming in. In fact, I think George Moraine has already answered in the text or in the Q&A function. This is from Ana Hernandez. She asks, what theologies are informing Caribbean theology, and have they made their way into the hymnody? And I'll say that George Moraine responded, theology of liberation, in the sense that we are encouraged to be our authentic selves as Caribbean people, gifted by God and free to share with the world.
George, you want to expand on that any further?
Well, the thing about it is that we all live in a global village, and just as we have benefited immensely from the hymns that have come from the United States of America and parts of Europe and Africa, Latin America, we are saying that we can all benefit, we can all understand what is God doing in this part of the world or that part of the world. And it is when we sing the hymns from these parts of the world, the emphases that come out indicate exactly what people are understanding about God's activity in their part of the world.
Thank you for that, George. Anyone else, Austin or Joanne? I really want to underscore that, and I think the theology has found its way into the hymns and into the hymnody generally. Take, for example, in the same Sing a New Song number 3. For us in the Caribbean, we know that our lands are beautiful, and these are not just lands that are there for the sake of tourists to come and enjoy, but we've also had to struggle with this pushback against celebrating our lands, because these same lands are also associated with the memory of slavery and sugar and hard work, if I may just put it that way, or as we say in the Caribbean, hard work. And I think what we see in some of the Caribbean hymns is this attempt to reframe the land. So With thankful harvest song, Lord, we lift our hearts to thee. As in thy holy house we meet, where oft we bend the knee. For food and for we praise thee, for mind and body fed, for crimson dawns, for sunset, and for our daily bread. Bless the Lord for beauty and abundant food. Lift your hearts in thanks to him and sing the Lord is good. So our harvest celebrations now have given us songs to sing. So we're not just singing, we plow the fields and scatter the good seed on the land, or call me thankful people, come, raise the song, all is safely gathered in here, the winter storm begin. But we have taken our own language, our own sort of region, the things that are uniquely ours, and in some way say, God is here. And not only is God here, but God is at work among us. And as God is at work among us, theology, which is basically God talk, if you were to unwrap it, and as Bevans rightly said, all theology is contextual theology. And so in the writing of our hymns, we are really also saying, this is who we are. And not only this is who we are, but finally, we are not ashamed of who we are. And so we now can be in some way like the Acts, where people are now hearing the gospel being proclaimed in their own tongue. And so there is this gift that we give to the world, but we also give it first to ourselves by affirming this is who we are.
Mm-hmm. And Mikie, if I may add, there's one song that comes to mind which speaks to the matter of incarnation of Christ in us. I feel me Jesus too. I feel me Jesus too. I want you to know. I feel me Jesus too. I feel me Jesus hand make me clap it so. I don't know if you know that one, but I remember the day when it dawned on me that this was a declaration to those who were saying, this is the way your worship should look. That here were we saying, this is me, Christ is in me, and this is how he moves me to worship him. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Joanne. Yes, Brian, another question. While you get your other question, I must say, though, as a follow-up, even though our hymnody has been expressing our theology, we still continue to struggle with what a good friend of mine who's just published a book, self-negation.
Yes.
We still struggle with self-negation, where there's this idea of, we're still not good enough to come before God. So that struggle continues, and that's why we need to press ahead.
Yeah.
There's not another question in the Q&A, but I have a question, if I could be so bold. I was mentioning to a friend of mine who is not music. He's just a dad that we do play dates with our kids. I said, I just got off this Zoom with a bunch of Caribbean hymnologists, and it was so awesome, and I'm so looking forward to this presentation. And he said, well, what parts of the Caribbean? So I said where everyone was kind of representing and from, and he said, it's interesting. They're all the kind of British islands, and I hadn't thought about that. So I wonder if you could speak to the cultural differences, and maybe is there a significant divide in the hymnody and the church cultures going on in the Caribbean based on that colonial history and the language differences?
I'm going to go between Ulston and George. George, having worked in Haiti, and the Methodist Church in the Caribbean is probably the most diverse in terms of language and culture. And so, George, you can probably speak to that a little bit more, I think, based on his experience.
Sorry. Oh, yes, I didn't unmute myself.
Yeah, and we can hear you. Yeah.
Yes, you can hear me. When we think of the Caribbean, our understanding as Methodists is that we are looking at a multicultural and multilingual entity. And so sometimes it's difficult to say what is authentic Caribbean, what language is the language that we affirm. In actual fact, all languages and all musical genres, whether they've come out of the United States of America or Europe, we embrace them all as a part of us. But what we are discovering is that the more we affirm what we have received from abroad, the more we realize that persons from abroad are receiving from us. And you know that question, that issue that you touched upon, Brother Mike, the matter of negating or still negating ourselves. It's a real concern. It's a serious concern. But wait, it seems as though I'm straying. What was the exact question?
How the different languages are expressed in terms of your hymnal. Because I know for the Methodist hymnal, for example, Brian, in the Moravian hymnal, all of our entries are in English. And again, that is simply because the East and West Indies province and the Jamaica province are all nestled in former British colonies. And I think you'll find a little bit more diversity in terms of the Methodist. So that's why I pointed to George, because the Methodist Church in the Caribbean and the Americas includes Espanol, Haiti, and so on. And I think in their hymns, you probably will see a little bit more of that diversity being reflected.
But Alston, maybe Alston, you wanted to come in on this one?
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, Brother Mike would have said some of it. We had some discussions in terms of translating some of the songs either into Spanish or English. But within our context, we really don't have that speaking congregation or members at all. Though in some countries, for example, in Tobago, there might have been some settling with the French or by the French. But remember, these islands were changing hands so often, and it ended up being more English than actual French. You can still see some vestiges in terms of when you go to the country itself, but the people are English speaking. And so the conversation then went not necessarily to put different languages in the hymn book, but how, if you were to do something supplemental, if you can encourage some of that so that it becomes now a missionary tool for those who are coming in because of the migration that is taking place within the Caribbean nations. So for example, here in Trinidad, there is a huge Venezuelan population. And so what ends up happening, most of them that come over are Catholics. And so the Catholics, for the most part, they just go Catholic. They're not going, for the most part, anywhere else.
And let me, Brian, I am looking in the other chat and I see there that I just saw a question.
Michael Hahn actually just asked about Roman Catholic differences.
Just asked about Roman Catholic.
Good segue.
Good segue. And I don't know if there were any other questions up ahead of that. But to say to you, Dr. Hahn, that and I'm sure my colleagues will agree with me, I think that the Catholics were ahead of the game in terms of the incorporation of Caribbean hymnody in their liturgy. Once Vatican II gave them the green light, they went straight ahead. And I think what made it even more enriching in the Caribbean context, which George can affirm, that when the Caribbean Conference of Churches was formed, the Roman Catholics in the Caribbean became full members. And to this day, the Roman Catholics are not even full members of the World Council of Churches. But the Roman Catholics in the Caribbean, I don't know if it was whoever, the Pope at the time, or whoever the cardinal in charge, but the Catholics were there. And what happened that pushed the envelope even further, because the Catholics didn't have a hymn book, there was not a either or dilemma, because for all of us in the Protestant, we were still struggling with the British hymnals that were still, venerated. There was no Catholic hymnal. So when the CCC formulated and Caribbean hymns started to emerge in the 1970s, the one group that really went full speed in their mass, Joanne would have made reference to someone like Father Richard Holong, and in Trinidad, what's his name now?
There was Gokul in Trinidad. Yep. But what you say is so true. The Catholics did not have a tradition of congregational singing. They had the little choirs that would sing, and in Latin, until with Vatican II, everything changed. And they really embraced the Caribbean hymns, because they didn't have to wrestle with, is Rome going to be angry because we are sick? No, they didn't have that problem.
So remember also, that discussion as we speak of how the Catholic Church was advanced or ahead of the game, the conversation went to the point where some of us were thinking they have gone too far. How could they do this to the hymn? So, and this is part of the struggle in Caribbean culture and Caribbean church, in terms of how do you, in affirming what you have and in affirming who you are, that there's still a struggle to use your own currency in your full worship life. So much so that it becomes an appendage to other things. Because even when we started the work in the Moravian Church in terms of our hymnal, initially it was supposed to be a supplementary hymnal that we would use along with the hymnal from the British Moravian Church. And so that conversation still has to continue, so that it becomes totally acceptable by all that this is who we are, and we are not the spice of a quote-unquote type of hymnody. We are who we are, period. We are more than just an isolated Caribbean place, because I do believe, because of this history, we have something British or European within us, and we can't deny that either. That is inside of us, and if we try to do that, we end up into more problems. We begin to deny who we are, but we are all of that and then some.
Thank you.
Let me add here that I've been with St. Lucia for a couple of years now with a choir and what's not. Like I said in the chat, and they all confirmed, the Catholics were way ahead of the game in singing folk masses and things like that. They're way ahead of the game. But what has happened now, well, at least in St. Lucia, when we go to St. Lucia, we I play we do classical concerts. It could be choir. Sometimes they do organ recitals. Sometimes they take a soloist to sing classical music, and they appreciate the older type of music, and they don't get it there anymore. So it's interesting. They've been ahead of the game with the Caribbean stuff, but they still have this longing for the traditional music, and they appreciate it, and we do very well when we go over there. So that's an interesting dynamic.
It reminds me of what my mother said: too far east is west.
Yes.
So it's always an attempt to give balance. Well, I see our time has come to an end. I don't know, Brian, if there's any other question that you want to throw in quickly, because I know persons may have to leave. If not.
No, I feel like that was it. Nothing else has come in the Q&A, and we've come to the end.
And let me close on this one note. I really believe what Rex Nettlefer said. It is impossible, absolutely impossible, to define our Caribbean and simply put us in one box. The whole world came to the Caribbean at the height of slave trade and sugar and all of those in terms of our history. And because the whole world came to us, I think this is the time for the Caribbean to go back to the whole world. And one way for us to go back is through our hymnody, which is rhythmic, syncopated, pretty much straightforward. I mean, all that you would have heard tonight, everything that you would have heard tonight is indeed Caribbean. So what you see is our output is very much as diverse as our DNA, in that we are part of this, part of that, but we are still totally Caribbean. And our goal is to, through our hymns, to help our people to embrace who we are, and not only to embrace it, but also to celebrate it, so that we overcome this self-negation, as Carlton Turner puts it, and really go before God and await that day when, as Joan talked about Revelation, that day when every kindred and every tribe, and I always say, not to misquote scripture, I expect to see some steel pan right in front of the throne. And hopefully then you'll be able to recognize some Caribbean rhythms as we gather around that throne one day. So thanks everyone. Thank you. And Brian, thanks to the Hymn Society. Thank you, Mike. Thank you to all of the leaders of the Hymn Society. And thanks to my colleagues for joining with me today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Phew.
Take care, everybody.